Hello. So recently, for a job application, I was asked to turn in a type of document that I have never been asked for before, which is a generative AI statement. Needless to say, having never been asked for one of these before, I did not have one ready made, so I wrote a new one. And I would like to share with you what I wrote in my generative AI statement. I don't know that this is calculated to get me a job, but it is a genuine expression of how I feel about the role of generative AI in higher education or education at any level, and generally speaking, within our larger culture. I do also want to talk a little bit about the idea of generative AI statements, so I will talk about that after I read you the statement that I wrote, which is this one. So this is my generative AI statement. I'll make this a little bit bigger so it's a little easier for you to read, and for me to read as well. As a teacher of writing, literary studies, and critical thinking, I've yet to be convinced that AI has much benefit in higher education. The program in writing and rhetoric at Pennsylvania State University, in which I currently teach, is experimenting with incorporating AI programs, primarily Microsoft Copilot, into rhetoric and composition courses. However, from what I've seen of the assignments utilizing these programs, they achieve very little that we could not reasonably expect students to do themselves, and which would benefit them as critical thinkers and writers far beyond the ease offered by AI. For some other disciplines, I could imagine beneficial uses of AI. But for departments in the humanities and the arts, my view is that it offers very little value and that the likelihood of students using AI in place of their own critical thought outweighs any possible benefits. While I recognize that our students are entering a world in which AI use will increasingly be the norm, unless the current AI bubble pops, as it certainly will, from a pedagogical perspective, the most helpful thing I can teach my students is to distrust any computer program or system of any type that offers to think for them. On an ethical level, I am opposed to the environmental damage, the power usage, freshwater usage and contamination, the cheapening of the arts with mass-produced AI slop, and the filling of the internet with untrustworthy AI misinformation. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Now, again, I don't think that this is likely to get me a job at any school that wants a generative AI statement. And I do think it's quite likely that more and more schools will start asking for these. AI is a part of the world that we live in, for better or for worse. In my view, almost universally for worse, though again, there are some ways in which AI can be quite beneficial. And I accept that, right? Like there are suggestions that AI can be useful in things like early cancer detection, and that's fucking amazing if that's something that the technology can really do. Similarly, ideas about AI's ability to identify errors and inconsistencies in large data sets may be quite useful for people who work in those fields. I am also very cautious about those kinds of claims because so far, much of the economics of AI, from what I can tell, seems to be big promises by tech bros and people like this, and then a continual conveyor belt of money being dumped into those programs that then produce subpar results compared to what was promised. So I am very cautious about that. That being said, for a discipline like English, whether that's rhetoric and composition, which is what I mostly teach, whether that's literary studies, which is what my actual background is in, whether that's creative writing, which my partner her background is in. I don't see any upsides to programs like Microsoft Copilot, like ChatGPT, like these language learning models, generative AI of any sort, that would justify actually incorporating them in to our classes. I mean, the only sort of comparable thing that I can really think of, perhaps, in a way, there's a sort of argument against, say, calculators in the same way, right? That calculators mean we don't have to do as much math in our heads, therefore we can get worse at doing math. That's entirely the problem, right? We get worse at doing math when we don't have to do it. And I'm not a math person. I'm not good at math. I do actually play a math game on my phone because I want to try and improve my ability to do basic math. But I'm not a math person. I don't enjoy math. It's not something that I would normally purposefully do. But the fact that calculators have made it easier to do math means that on average we are less good at it. There's a certain degree to which computers have done the same thing in areas like research, right? So like when we are finding scholarly articles or something like this, computers have made that substantially easier. And that's a big part of my life. I do a lot of research. That's very central to my work. But it also means that students can do keyword searches throughout articles and just find the keywords they're looking for. And they often end up taking those quotations out of context. So it also leads to errors and mistakes in the research process. And the reason that I'm bringing these two things up is because these are technologies that have, on some levels, made our lives easier as researchers, as thinkers, as scholars, as scientists, whatever we are. On the other hand, they have come with these negative downsides. The problem is that none of those technologies inherently replace our ability to think, which AI language learning models seem to do, as far as I can tell. From what I can tell, I can't, and I haven't used them. I don't approve of them, and so I don't use them. But one of my former office mates was very interested in AI, and he used ChatGPT extensively for various purposes, and he did so in what I think of as a comparatively quite responsible way, in that he would always double-check the stuff. He would refine things until it actually was correct, et cetera, et cetera. He also had the traditional research, writing, and rhetorical skills to do that, which not everyone does. But my sense of it is that it's very, very easy to just go into a program like ChatGPT, say, give me an argument that does this, write me an essay that does this, compose me an email that conveys this, and to let ChatGPT do that for you rather than doing it yourself. And so, I mean, there are recent studies that have come out, and I think this is an important thing to be aware of, that suggests that a reliance on AI undermines our cognitive abilities, our basic abilities to think carefully and critically about the world. And for me, when you combine that, the negative cognitive and psychological impacts that AI seems to be having, with the massive environmental costs in terms of energy usage, clean water usage and contamination, et cetera, and then the corresponding financial costs to the rest of us out in the world, right? That our energy bills go up as AI data centers hoover up as much energy as they can conceptually get their hands on. Our costs for water and the availability of fresh potable water, which is already a global problem, that becomes much more of a problem as AI data centers use massive amounts of fresh water and then contaminate it. So we have all of these negative things. And if the benefit of it for us in the arts and the humanities is going to be things like, these are some of the things that the program I'm currently in, the program in writing and rhetoric, has had people do when incorporating AI. If it's going to be about reverse outline this argument, find the points of stasis theory in this, as they're approached in this essay, things like this. Those are things that students should be doing because they actually help students think about a text. If you're going to ask students to write a response to an argument or to use that argument to support their own argument about a topic, then students need to know that source. When you let them do this analysis through ChatGPT or something like this, Microsoft Copilot, whatever it is, you are allowing them to outsource their own thinking about this text, their own understanding of what this argument is doing and how the argument is doing it. And when they outsource that thought process, they do not understand what they are being asked to engage with. And if they don't understand what they're being asked to engage with, they're not going to engage with it on a critical, scholarly, or even competent level. And so it is maybe a better comparison would be if rather than you punching the numbers into the calculator with the right operators and putting them in the right order and things like that, if the calculator just told you what the right answer was. And I guess that's not entirely a clear distinction, because a calculator does tell you what the right answer is if you put the information in it. But I guess what I mean is when you put that information into a calculator for a mathematical equation or something like this, you have to be very cognizant of what information you're putting in there, what order you're putting it in there, how you're connecting the different terms, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is a good amount of construction to that. And especially in things like middle school, high school, elementary school math, whatever it is, often there is a requirement to show your work, and a calculator does not do that for you. But ChatGPT will. If this is a technology that can do the analytical steps that a writer otherwise would need to do to build an argument, if it can summarize the research sources, if it can do whatever, then why would any student ever accept our assertion that they should write their own papers? Right? If we're saying let ChatGPT do all of the thinking prior to the actual writing of the paper, then A, why should students not just let ChatGPT do the thinking to write the paper itself? B, we've put students at a huge disadvantage because they have not done the thinking that goes into that paper, which means they don't know how to write that paper. And yeah, you could make an argument that, well, they have to look at the stuff that ChatGPT has generated, but see, we're then putting them in a position where they're dependent on ChatGPT to be accurate, right? So again, if you're having ChatGPT summarize an argument for your students so that they can then respond to it in an essay, they're not going to be able to respond to in any meaningful way because they're getting a summary of something, and they're getting a summary that may or may not be accurate. They don't have the knowledge in their heads to determine whether it's accurate. They don't have the knowledge in their heads to genuinely respond to it because all they have is a basic, possibly inaccurate version of it. Again, you combine that with all of the negative environmental, economic, and sociocultural implications of generative AI. I don't see any place for ChatGPT, for Microsoft Copilot, for generative AI programs in the arts and humanities. And again, I don't think that's a stance that is likely to be looked upon favorably by many in the top tiers of academia, not necessarily professors or instructors or people like that, but administrators who have already followed the corporate lead of corporate organizational structures in which a president who may or may not actually bring any real value gets paid hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, while the people doing the majority of the actual labor throughout the university, including both faculty and staff, are systematically underpaid. They have taken, in exactly the same way that universities have followed that corporatized organizational structure, many administrations have fallen in love with the promise of generative AI. So I think it's likely to be something that increasingly becomes the norm, that we as academic job seekers will be expected to present a generative AI statement. And I think it's extraordinarily unlikely that my generative AI statement will change much from what it currently is.